Maybe let's get started. So hopefully others will join. So today's daf.
Everybody heard you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, today's daf in Masechet Bava Kama is daf Yud Zayin, and it's complicated. This isn't easy stuff, I would say. And I think he got to 2 lines from the bottom of Tet Zayin Amabet. Kafran, Ho'el va'ata liyadan nimava milta. So I'll just give
Where?
2 lines from the bottom. What did you get up to, the 2 dots?
Oh, wow. No, I didn't get any near that. I got up to Amar Rabbi Avahu.
That's the 2 dots, right?
Mm,
10 lines from the bottom. Or you have a
yes.
different...
It is the 2 dots,
Okay, so I'm
actually.
happy to start from there. It's a fine
Okay,
move.
great. Thank you.
I'm a Rabbi Avo, I'm Rabbi Yochanan. So we are around 12 lines, I think, from the bottom of Tet Zayin Amabet. It's a good review. It actually is in the middle of what we're doing. Said Rabbi Avo and named Rabbi Yochanan. Motzei shtar chov bashuk. A person, remember, we've been discussing this for several days based on the Mishnah that we had a few days ago. You're walking through the street, you find a document, and the document says that someone, say Rosa, owes me $100, right? Shimon owes Ruvain. I'm going to use those names, sorry. Shimon owes Ruvain $100, right? So this is a very valuable thing. It would cause Shimon to have to pay a lot of money. So we discussed in the Mishnah, if there's achrayut, you shouldn't return it. You should return it. We've been discussing this for several days. It says Rabbi Avo in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Afal pisha katav bo hempek. Even if it says in it a hempek, which we're about to discuss, means a sort of a confirmation, right? The star says Ruvain lent $100 to Shimon. A hempek is that we verified this in Beit Din, and we, the Eidim, signed it, right? So even if it says that, lo yachzirenu leba'alim, you shouldn't return it to Ruvain, the original owner of the star, right? When Ruvain lent $100 to Shimon, Shimon gave the star to Ruvain. Don't return it to Ruvain. Says the Gemara, lo mibai hecha de lo katuv bo hempek. Certainly, if it didn't have a hempek, you could say, this is not much of a star. You shouldn't return it because maybe Shimon wrote it for Ruvain, but never actually borrowed the money, right? He wrote it with the intention of borrowing money, but he never did. And this was sort of sitting on the shelf, and then he lost it, and now he's going to have to pay money that he never borrowed. But here, ela afilu katuv bo hempek, and even if it has the hempek, and says the Gemara now, my ninu, what does the hempek mean? The mikuyam, that it is verified, right? That witnesses saw it happen. So there's no doubt that Ruvain used the star to lend money to Shimon, gave him $100. Still, lo yachzir, you shouldn't return this to chayshina lipiraon, because we worry that he maybe paid him back. The fact that Ruvain lent money to Shimon does not prove that Ruvain is still owed money by Shimon. Maybe Shimon paid him back. Now, yesterday we had a different opinion that said that, what do you mean? If you pay it back, you rip up the star. But clearly in this case, the Rabbi Avo is not worried, and Rabbi Yochanan's name does not agree with that concern of Shmuel. Rabbi Yirmiyah asks Rabbi from the following statement, which we're going to have later today. It says, Kol Maseh Beit Din harizi yachzir. Anything that's verified in court, like we think that means they wrote a hempek, you should give it back. Amar le, so Rabbi Avo said back to Rabbi Yirmiyah Bray, oh, my little Yirmiyah, lo kol maseh beit din shavin. That's not what it means. It doesn't mean not every time that something is verified in court do you give it back. Ela kigon shuchsak kafran. Let's say this is a case where, let's say the guy's lied multiple times already. Shuchsak is a liar. And then in those cases, you don't necessarily give the star back. But if there's other cases where you would give it back. Amar Rava said, Rava, why is that? I don't get it. A guy, remember, right? So Shimon says, I paid it back, right? So usually you would believe him. But why do you not believe him? Because he's lied before, but says, so what? People lie and then they change, it doesn't mean you never believe him forever. Amar Rava says, Rava, you're right. I got another explanation. Matnitzin b'shtar chatata and adrachta. Tos is very bothered by the word adrachta here. But either way, certainly the achaltata, meaning it is like, and like Rabbi Zera. We had this earlier yesterday.
Yeah, we said it was a foreclosure, or it was what was the other one?
It's a foreclosure, or it's something that allows you to collect it because you didn't get the scribe's bill, remember? So These are things that you can't directly collect with, and that's where we go according to the Beit Din, but not in a case where it's a regular loan, which just says Ruvain borrowed money from Shimon, and Ruvain's now going to go and use it to collect money. There, you don't necessarily give it back. Okay. Now says the Gemara today, well, once we mentioned this question of a person's reliability, let's delve into that a little bit more. Kafran, where kafran literally means a person denied the loan or denied something about it. Since it came to our hands to discuss it, let's say some more things about it. Amr of Yosef Bar Menumi, Amr of Nachman. Amrulo, let's say the court says to a plaintiff, right? I think that's the plaintiff, defendant, I don't know, says to someone, say Tainlo. You know, we looked into this issue. Ruvain lent the money to Shimon. Shimon, go and give him the money. That's what say Tainlo means. Go give it to him, right? And a couple weeks later, let's say I added the time, but it doesn't matter when, Ruvain comes to Shimon and says, remember, court said you got to pay me. I want you to pay me my money. And Shimon says, oh, I paid you back. V'amar parati. So remember, in that case, Ne'aman, he's believed because it's similar to kofer bakol, right? He basically says, I paid you back the whole thing. Now, Rashi points out he'd have to make a what we call shvuat hesed. You'd have to swear, no question, like anyone in that case, but you're believed. Shavuot Tov on the top line of Daf Yud Zayin.
What's a Shavuot Hesed again? What is that?
Shavuot Hesed is a shvuah midrabanan. So it's a shvuah midrabanan. If you say something and deny it, the Torah does not require you to make a shvuah unless you're modeh b'miktzat. But the Rabbanan said that even if you're kofer b'kol, as long as we agree that the thing originally happened, right? Even though we know that the shtar was good and Beit Din established that, if you deny it, you have to make a shvuah and therefore you don't pay. But that's as opposed to what would be the opposite case, which we'll see in a second, where the person who lent you the money makes the shvuah that you didn't pay them back and gets to collect from you, right? So here the borrower can make a shvuah because they deny the whole thing. We'll see why in a second, actually. And
in any denial?
Sorry?
Any instance of denial, he can make this shvuah, or he's required to make it?
He is required to make it midrabanan in any instance of denial where there's proof that the thing actually happened. Right? Meaning if there was never proof that it happened, I walked over to you and said, you borrowed money, and I said, I don't know who you are, then you can't force him to make a shvuah. But in this case, where you have a shtar that Beit Din established, you did borrow money, and you say, it's true, I borrowed money, but I paid you back. And the guy says, you never paid me back. Then you have to make the shvuah midrabanan, but it's only drabanan. But that is the bright Rashi points that part out, but the Gemara doesn't even say that, right? It just says ne'aman. Ba milveh lichtov. If the lender comes to court and says, look, I feel like I'm gonna have a real hard time collecting from this guy. I'd like you to write me a shtar that says I can go collect it, or what you called a foreclosure document, or the Gemara yesterday called an adrachta, right? So then the ein kotvim, they don't write it for him, right? Right? They don't give it to him because the guy says he paid it and he's believed. Okay, that's case one. But we're at the second line of Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. But if the court said, not say tein which means go give it to him, but chayav ata litein you must give it to him, right? Which is a more immediate. So court would say, this is what's responsible, and then actually go and do it. So it's the opposite way, sorry, right? Court would say, this is responsible. Chayav ata tein means you have to give it. Say tein means go do it now, right? So if they just said chayav ata litein v'amar parati eno neman, and then he comes to collect and the guy says, I already paid you back, he's not believed to pay him back. Because when the court says to you, it's like when you get a traffic ticket, right? They say you have to pay, you don't pay right away. When they say if you don't pay in a week, you're going to have a fine, right? That's when you pay, some of us. So it's the same thing here. When court says, okay, you're guilty, but you didn't say yet you have to pay. Later, court will say, okay, you've exhausted all your appeals, you've got to pay. So then it's plausible that you paid. But when court just says you're guilty, meaning you're going to have to pay, we don't believe you that you actually paid, and you're not trusted to say parati.
But then don't you get punished for doing the right thing there?
Well, it depends on whether you did or not.
If you
well, it's true, but look, if you were smart, you get a receipt when you pay, right? So it's not like, there's always, again, this is not a usual circumstance, right? The normal thing is if you pay, you get someone to prove that you paid, right? So Eino Ne'aman.
But it seems like when he says chayav, that's with stronger language. The way I underheard what you're saying, it's just the opposite.
It's the opposite. Chayav atalitein lo means you're responsible, you're guilty. But there's always sentencing later, is how I think of it, though it's not obviously the same thing. It's not criminal. When they say tein lo means go and do it. So that is an immediate thing. And the implication is if you don't do it, we're going to come collect your stuff. Chayav atalitein lo is, maybe in fact you'll find a way out, or you'll prove that it was already paid, or you'll have other stuff. So it's less immediate. So we assume you didn't pay yet, unless you prove it, right? And then then the Malva comes to court and says, I want you to write in a drachta for me, a collection document. Then you can write it for him. Because even though the guy denies and says, I paid you, he doesn't have proof of it, and you don't trust him. That's what Rav Nachman said. Rav Yumi said in the name of Rav Nachman. The fourth line now, Rav Zvid, Mishmei Rav Nachman said, no, that's incorrect. You heard Rav Nachman wrong. Bein seitein lo, bein chayav ata litein lo, whether the court said, go do it, or said you will have to do it, if the guy says parati ne'eman, a person who says I paid is believed. But, and therefore, if the Malva wants an adrachta, you can't get it unless he can prove that it wasn't paid. You know where there's a difference between whether the court said you have to pay or go pay? This is where you can make a distinction, a haflaga, a difference between those two cases. If amrulo, if the court said to Shimon, say teinlo, go pay, which is more immediate, and then he says, va'amar, and he says parati. He says, again, let's kick the case. 2 weeks later, Reuven comes to Shimon and says to Shimon, I want you to pay me back the loan. And Shimon says, what are you talking about? I paid you back already. And Reuven says, you're such a liar. You didn't pay me back. And not only didn't you pay me back, but 3 days ago, I brought witnesses to you, to your house, to say, pay me back. And you said, I'm not paying you, right? That he was offered the chance to pay, and he says, I'm not paying. So why would I trust you that? There says Rav Nachman, Huchsak kafran le'oto mamon. He is a denier that he owes that money. And so his later claim that, I paid you in quiet is implausible, because in front of witnesses, he already denied it. And therefore, he would not be believed. But if the court had said to him, chayav talitein lo, which remember is not as immediate, you're going to have to pay him. And then 2 weeks later, the guy comes to collect and he says, Amar parati, and he says, you're such a liar, edim mi'iden otosha lo para, that I came to you with witnesses and you said, I'm not paying you back. You're still believed. V'chazar v'amar parati, and then you later said, I paid it back. Lo huchsak kafran lo'oto mamon. We don't say that you're lying about that money. Why? My time, because ishtamutihu dekam ishtamit mine. He is, remember we had this language earlier, you are just pushing him off, you're delaying, you're stalling. So we do think that the witnesses are telling the truth. And then when Reuven came to collect from Shimon, Shimon said, I'm not paying you. But he was going to pay him. He was just delaying because the court had not said to him yet, you have to pay. The court had said, you're going to have to pay. And so he didn't have the money yet. So he was trying to deny it. Later on, he got the money. He said, I'll pay you back. And therefore, even though, Savra, he thought, Adam Aini Berabanan Bedini, like any appeals court, the Rabbanan are going to look into the case more. They're going to look at all the things. It'll take some time. Maybe they'll find a flaw with the case. And so I'm not paying up ahead of time. But then it's plausible that a week later, he decided to pay. Right, and therefore you don't say he's huchzak kafran. You don't say he is a chazaka as a liar. And if you don't have a chazaka of a liar, then you're trusted to say parati. If you did pay back, you have to swear, like I said. But since you deny everything, basically you're kofer b'kol. Your Torah believes you.
But he said it's lo ne'eman here. In this case, it's lo ne'eman.
He's sorry. Say that
you
again.
You say chayav in the case of chayav. He said it's lo ne'eman. He's not believed. He's delaying it. He's delaying it, but he's not believed. And in the meantime,
he's believed if the original case was, if the court said to him, say tein lo, then he's not believed. He's huchzak kafran. But if the court said, chayav atali tein lo, and he then claims, I paid you back, he is believed, again, with the shvua, even if he had previously denied the debt. Because we think that when he denied it, it wasn't because he's a liar and he's never going to pay it. It's because he was trying to stall, but he really intends to pay it. And we had actually a similar case. If a man said, it doesn't have to be a man, but if a person says to another person, "Mana li biyadcha," right? A person says to someone else, "I lent you $1,000. You have $1,000 of mine in your house." The halal Omer and the other, and Shimon says back to Ruvain, "I don't know who you are. Ein lecha biyadi klum. I never met you before. I don't owe you anything." Right? And then Edim come, and the Edim say, "No, we saw them lend him $1,000." And then the guy says, "Oh, you know what? I paid you back." Right? The Chazar v'amar parati. So says Rav Bar Chana, look, this guy is a liar, right? He's not a liar. He's not necessarily in general, but huchzak kafran lo'oto mamon, right? He denied that debt. So if you deny that debt, then later on you claim I paid it, that's not a plausible argument because you claim that you didn't owe it. So because we documented that you denied it, we won't trust you anymore to say you paid it back without proof, of course, right? And in fact, there was a case, he had the Shabtai. There was a guy, Shabtai, who's not going to be such a great guy in this story, but he was Bray Rebbe Mirunis. I don't know what time he might have lived, but he was the son of Rebbe Mirunis. And Katavle the Kalte, he wrote for his daughter-in-law in the Ketubah, I'm going to buy you a fancy Itztalia de Milta. Itztalia means a dress or a coat. Milta usually means like, I think we usually translate it as like some very fine material. What is?
A fine wool garment.
Oh, there we go. Fine wool, yeah.
Italian.
Right, but remember, that's the language they use by Yosef, by Tonat Pasim, right? Shtei Slaim Milat. Milat is the word of I don't know if it's Italian in that case. But anyways, so he said to his daughter-in-law, I'm going to, in a ketubah, I'm going to buy you, I'm going to guarantee you, you know, the fanciest clothing. Biktubata, right? Vikibla aleh, and he accepted upon himself. She accepted that, you know, they made agreement that this is what's going to happen. And then, of course, irchas ketubata, right? She lost her ketubah, right? So they lost the document. So she had to go write a new one. She went to the ADM and she said, you know, my father-in-law promised me this and this. I want you to write a new document that he's going to pay me these things. And of course he said, Amar Leah, Lo hayud dvarim me'olam, I don't know what you're talking about. I never promised to buy you any clothing. And Atu Sahadi, and then witnesses came, Va'amru, and they said, in Katavla, right? Oh no, that's not true. He did originally write to her that he's going to buy her fancy Italian clothing. And the guy says, oh, you know, I just remembered, I write it, but I bought it for her already, right? L'sof amar lahu parate. He said to her, oh, yeah, I got you that fancy stuff. So then it's the same case. And he said, amar le huchsuka huchzeket kafran loto itzdalia. Clearly, this guy is lying about the suit, about the clothing, and therefore the father-in-law is not believed, just like with the Baal Chov. If you denied it when you didn't have proof of it, then you can't go ahead and say, I paid it back after you get proof of it. So that is why we brought this up about the Huchsak Kafran. Continues the Gemara, similar idea. We are the fourth to last narrow line. Amar Rabbi Avin, Amar Elai, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hayachayev l'chaveru shvu'ah. Let's say a person has to make a shvu'ah to somebody else, right? Now we're going to see different kinds of shvu'ot, but let's say modeh b'miksa, right? A person said, I lent you $1,000. Guy comes back and says, you lent me 500 and here it is. I deny the other 500. So there we learned many times, that's called modeh b'miktzat. You admitted some of it. You've got to make a shvu'ah on the rest, right? That you don't know it. So court requires you to make a shvu'ah. So you're chayav the chaver shvu'ah, the amar, and you say, yeah, but I already did. Nishpati. I already made the shvu'ah. And edim me'idinoto shelo nishpat. The witnesses who come and say, we actually were there yesterday. And again, you can't prove that he never swore, but you can prove that he denied making the shvu'ah. We were there yesterday, and Reuven said to Shimon, I want you to make my shvu'ah. And Shimon said, I'm not making the shvu'ah, right? And then the next day, he comes back and says, okay, I made it already, like it happened. So it's very similar to the previous case. Says Rabbi Avin, Rabbi Yochanan, Huchsak kafran lo to shvu'ah. So then he clearly said, I'm not making the shvu'ah. And when he later says, I did it, and we just happen to have no witnesses, that's not plausible. Amru kamed Rabbi Avo. Now, they said this in front of Rabbi Avo, and Amar Lui said, you know, that makes sense. But you have to distinguish between different kinds of shavuot. Mistavra, it makes sense that Miltad's Rabbi Avin, that when Rabbi Avin quoted Rabbi Elai, Rabbi Yochanan saying this, that's shintayev shvu'ah be'beit din. That's where the court is mechayev shvu'ah. So a shvu'ah d'oraita, shvu'ah from beit din. Avachayev atzmo shvu'ah, right? Let's say a person said, in a case where you wouldn't necessarily have to make a shvu'ah, you say, I wrote in a document, I'll borrow $1,000 from you, and should anything ever come up with this case, I agree, I accept on myself that I'll make a shvu'ah, right? Even if you come to me later and I say it never happened, I wrote in the document that I'll make a shvu'ah, even if I deny everything. There, even if I say to you on Monday, in front of witnesses, I'm not swearing. And then on Tuesday, I come to you and say, okay, I made the shvuah already. Then I would be believed. Because why? Ne'eman. Because avid inish de mikri, people sort of say, va'amri, and they say, hadrua, I read the words, avid inish de mikri va'amar. Right? There are people who say, I'm going to take my time before I say it. Meaning, I plan to do it. The Beit Din did not require me to do it. It's sort of a voluntary kind of shvuah. It's not really voluntary, but I accept it on myself. So in front of these Monday, I don't feel like doing it. I'm not going to do it. I don't have the money, let's say, or something. But then, or I'm not ready to do it. Maybe the cases will change. But it could be that you'll say it in the future. Meaning, since it's not a court-mandated shvuah, people are much less strict about it, and they actually will change and then ultimately end up saying it.
But he didn't make the shvur yet. He did not yet make it.
No, he claims he did, right? So meaning he didn't want to say it at that time, right? But because he didn't want to do it, Rashi understands that he didn't want to do it in front of the witnesses. Because if he did it in front of the witnesses, it would have more effect, right? So he wants to do it privately, potentially. So he's going to make the shvuah, but he's not going to do it in front of these witnesses. So when the witnesses came and said, make the shvuah, he said, I'm not making a shvuah. But then a week later, he says, I went to the guy and did make a shvuah. He is trusted to do that because, you obviously trust the person to do it unless you can prove that he did it. So
maybe he made it in front of other witnesses who aren't there. Maybe he made it shavua in another town. He made a shavua, right?
Right. No, so that's okay, right? So
doesn't the shvuah though only have like real effect unless you're in Bet Din? You can do a shvuah just anywhere at any time in front of anyone?
So I think so. I presume so. I mean, remember the case was where so again, this is all based on the fact that we trust that people have personal integrity, right? I mean, certainly if someone, and that's where actually the question of what a kafran and what a liar is come up as being very different, right? So kafran doesn't necessarily mean a liar. Kafran means someone who denies the debt, right? Which is different. If you prove someone to lie, then their shvuah doesn't count for anything. But in this case, a personal shvuah is, I think, just based on your personal commitment. So you take it upon yourself. No one would do that, but not necessarily in front of Beit Din. Of course, if the Beit Din is mechayev you a shvuah, then you have to do it in front of the Beit Din, right? That's different. Okay. So, Drew Kamei Rabbi Oven. They told this story back to Rabbi Oven that they made this distinction between a shvuah mandated by Beit Din and a shvuah that was a personal responsibility. And Amrullah said, yeah, that in fact is correct. You guys understood. That's what I meant. I also only meant that if you had required a shvuah in Beit Din and then you refused to make it, you're not later on believed to say that you made it. And Itmar Nami, Amr Rabbi Oven, Amr Rabbi Lai, Rabbi Yochanan, some actually said it explicitly. Hayachayev the Chavero shvuah Beit Din. You're chayev to someone else's shvuah that's mandated by the court, and you say nishpati, and you say I made the shvuah already, and witnesses come and say that we were there and you refused to make a shvuah, then huchsak kafran laoto shvuah, then you are confirmed to be a denier of that shvuah, and your subsequent admission does not count.
Are there not edim in this actual shvuah that he makes?
So in this case, they're not edim, or the edim are not found, or maybe you say there are edim, but they took the last plane out of Hollywood or something. You know what I mean? They're not present. Amar Reb Asi Amar Reb Yochanan. Back to the topic that we've had for the last 4 days, in case you thought we got away from it. We didn't. Says Reb Asi in the name of Reb Yochanan, HaMotzei Shtarchov Bashuk. Okay, again, we had many cases of this, but it's super confusing to me. So maybe super confusing to others. So I want to clarify it. Right? You're walking through the street, you find a document on it that says Ruvain agrees to lend Shimon $100. Shimon will pay him back from any property he has. Let's say it has achrayut. It doesn't matter for this discussion. And signed, on this date. And not only that, you find the shtarchov in the street, the katav bo hempek. And it has on the bottom of it written, we witnesses watched this happen and we confirm that this all occurred. And so it's validated, right? It's like a validated shtar. And katuv bo zmano bo bayom. And the date on the shtar is, what's today? April 16th, March 16th. Sorry, 1 month off. So the date on the shtar is March 16th. It's the same day you found it. Says Rabbi Yochanan yachziru liba'alim. You can give that shtar back to Ruvain. Because Ruvain clearly lent money to Shimon. If you're worried about the concern that we raised earlier, that sometimes you write a shtar to borrow, but you didn't end up using it, well, here there's a henpik, and a henpik means that it was used. Ha-katav bo henpik, right? And imishum piraon, remember the other thing we talked about yesterday was, so what if you lent him money? Maybe you paid him back, and you never got the shtar back. Says Rabbi Yochanan, you know what? The priya bat yuma lo chashina. People don't pay back the loan on the same day they borrowed it. So if it says in the shtar that Reuven lent Shimon $1,000 on March 16th, it's implausible that Shimon already paid him back on the same day. So if you find the star and it's written the same day, you can just give it back to Reuven, as long as it's confirmed, right? If it's not confirmed, you can't give it back because maybe he never actually used it. But if it's a confirmed star, you can give it back to Reuven because there's no chance that Shimon paid him back on the same day. Amar Reb Zera Reb Yasi, Reb Zera Reb Yasi, whoa, Miyam Reb Yochanan Hachi. Don't you remember? Did Reb Yochanan really say this? You yourself, Reb Yasi, quoted us another halacha in the name of Reb Yochanan that seems to go against that. And the halacha that you quoted us in the name of Reb Yochanan was the following. Shtar shalavebo. Let's say a person, again, Reuven lends $100 to Shimon. And Reuven writes in a shtar, Shimon borrowed $100 from me. He's going to pay me back. And if he doesn't, remember, if you write in a shtar, if you don't pay me back, his house is meshubad to me. It's achrayut nechasim. And if he sells his house, I could go collect it from the person he bought it to. And it's signed. And Shimon goes and pays Reuven back $100, right? And then Reuven gives a shtar to Shimon. Shimon should rip it up. But Shimon comes up with a great idea. He says, I want to borrow another $100 from you. Lend me money again. You're such a nice guy. You lent me money. I paid you back, right? This is how all good schemes start, right? You built some trust and lend me another $100. And I have a shtar that says, I borrowed $100 from you. So we'll use this shtar, right? Now, remember, that doesn't work. The reason it doesn't work is that the first time you borrowed money and you wrote a shtar, remember when you write a shtar, there's a call that goes out. Everybody knows about the shtar. So everybody knows that Shimon borrowed $100 from Reuven. And therefore, if you buy Shimon's property, you know that it's going to be meshubad to Reuven. But once you paid him back, that shibud is over. And the second time you borrowed money without a real shtar, that's a milva al peh. That's you might have witnesses, but you don't have a new shtar. And when you do a milva al peh, a milva orally, without written, then you can't collect from mishubadim because the word doesn't go out. So now you're basically trying to use a shtar for something that it's not really used for. So says Rabbi Yochanan, clearly, right? Shtar shalavebo, use the shtar to borrow money, uparu, and you paid back. Eno chozer v'lovebo, you cannot use the same shtar to borrow money again. Shekfar nimchal shibudo, because the responsibility of your property is gone. Once you paid it back, your house is no longer contingent on this money. And if the guy wants to lend you more money, he either can write a new shtar to include the property or lend it to you without property. But you can't use a shtar when it's not really a shtar.
Is there a call on the shtar that is now used and finished and paid back? Does everyone, they know initially there's a shtar created, but does a call go out when it's concluded and it's paid back?
So it's a good question, but it doesn't matter because even if there's no call, the facts are that loan ended, right? So the loan ended. And since the loan ended, the loan that was described in the shtar no longer exists. The new loan is not the loan that's written in this shtar, right? So you can write a new shtar, but the fact is that this shtar is not written for that thing. So therefore, says Rabbi Yochanan, you can't use the shtar again. Now, says Gemara, 1 second. When would you try to use the shtar again? Amos, when would you try to use it? If you're talking about the next day, right, a week later, then of course you can't use the shtar because the date on the shtar is March 16th. So you can't use a shtar dated March 16th to borrow money on March 23rd, right? Because that's called a shtar chov mukdam, where the date is earlier than the date you actually borrowed the money. That was, remember, in the first Mishnah in Bava, in Rosh Hashanah, right? My area shekvar nimchal shibudo. Why do you say that you can't use the shtar because you already gave up your responsibility? Typically, the havale mukdam. It's a shtar that's written before you actually lent the money. It's not, and we learned in many Mishnayot, but we had in Rosh Hashanah as well. Shtarei chov hamukdamim psulim. A shtar chov that has an earlier date than the day you lent the money is pasul. Ella, it must be that Rabbi Yochanan is telling you can't use the shtar even for the same day, right? Let's say I borrow $1,000 in the morning, I pay him back in the afternoon, and then in the evening I got another stock to buy, and I want to borrow another $1,000, right? You can't even use it in the same day. Elav biyume, you can't use it the same day. But what do you see from here? Alma pari inish biyume, that sometimes people pay back their loans the same day. And you just told me that you can return a shtar that you find in the street if it's the same day it was written, because people don't pay back the same day. I said to him, 1 second, you're going a little too far. Mika amina de lo pari klal. I didn't say that it's impossible to pay back on the same day. Of course it happens once in a while. I'm telling you, it's not common. De lo shchicha inshi de pari biyumika amina. All I said is that it's not frequent to pay back. So if you find it on the street, you can assume he didn't pay back. But it certainly happens sometimes that you borrow money and you pay back the same day, especially if you do, high frequency trading, as in our case. So maybe that's what you did. Okay, so that is a very interesting case. Rav Kahana says, you know what? I have a whole nother explanation. The reason that Rabbi Yochanan said that you can give the shtar back that was found on that day, you know why? It's because you asked the guy and he said, Kishachayev modeh. The guy said, I still owe the money, right? You found the shtar that says Reuven lent Shimon $1,000, and Shimon said, yeah, I didn't pay it back yet. So that's why. It's not because you can't, it's true. If Shimon said I paid it back, you wouldn't give the shtar back to Reuven because maybe he paid it back, even the same day. But when Shimon said, I didn't pay him back, now you can give the shtar to Reuven. Says, well, of course you can. What's the chiddush? Right? You found the shtar, it's confirmed, and Shimon said, I didn't pay back, so you give it back to Reuven. Says, well, you got to think about people are pretty tricky nowadays. Maybe it's possible that in fact Shimon paid back Reuven. So why is he letting Reuven take a shtar that says he owes $1,000? Because Shimon trusts Reuven. And he says, look, next week I'm going to need to borrow money from Reuven again. And he already has a shtar. Shimon paid back Reuven. You know why he says I didn't pay back? Because he wants the shtar to still be a good shtar. He's going to have to borrow money for payroll next week, right? And he doesn't want to have to pay the money, the fee, to get, a shtar written and signed and confirmed. Lipshita the safra chayish. He doesn't want to pay the pshita. The pshita, I don't know. Again, it's like the pennies, right? The fee of the safra of the scribe. He doesn't want to have to pay. So he trusts Reuven. Now you have to have a lot of trust, right, to let someone have a shtar that says you owe them $1,000. But I guess he trusts him, and he says, "I'm going to deny it that I paid him back. I want Reuven to have that. I think Reuven will lend me $1,000 because now he'll have proof."
So wouldn't he have to pay twice then? I mean, isn't he obligated himself? Because if he said he didn't pay back, then Reuven gives him another. Wouldn't he? Wouldn't he pay back twice?
He says to the person who found that I didn't pay back. So they give the shtar to Reuven. Yes, Reuven can come to his house and say, "You never paid me back. I have a shtar." But Reuven doesn't. Shimon does not think Reuven's going to do that. Shimon trusts Reuven, and he's going to go to Reuven and say, "Look, you have the shtar. No one's got to. I don't want to pay." Remember, Shimon, the person who gets the money has to pay the fee. Shimon says, "I don't want to pay the fee. I want to borrow another $1,000 from you. Can you just do it? You have a shtar that says I owe you $1,000. You can always prove me in court. You can bring me to court if I don't pay you back. It's a beautiful scheme." So why don't you trust the scheme? Kamash Milan, you know what? Says Rabbi Yochanan, the reason that you don't think that's what's happening is because Im Kain, Malva Gufe Yoshavik, the Reuven is not going to go along with the scheme. Because you know what Reuven's going to say? Someone's going to hear about this, right? Every good scheme gets detected if you've watched any movies, right? Someone is listening, right? And Savar Shami Be Rabbanan, the Rabbanan are going to hear that about this funny business, and you know what they're going to say? The shtar's a puzzle shtar. Umafsidili, and they're going to throw it away. And now I gave Shimon another $1,000, and I have no way to collect. So Reuven is never going to go along with this kind of scheme, and therefore, if Reuven says he didn't pay me back, and Shimon says I didn't pay him back, you give the shtar back to Reuven. That sounds interesting, but what about the following case? What about our mission?
How far does this person have to go? I mean, you said earlier, one case is it shechayev modeh, but does this a person finds the shtar in the shuk? I mean, it would be simpler for him to just bring it to Beit Din, let Beit Din figure it out. He has to go to Shimon to ask Shimon if he.
I mean, you could say Beit Din is doing this part, but the question is, it's not. I mean, it doesn't matter if Beit Din has a messenger who does this too, but someone's got to do this, right? Says the Gemara, well, what about our mission? Now, this is our mission that led us 5 days ago to this many, many days of gray hair, right? The Mishnah said the following: Matzah shtarechov. If you find a shtar in the street, if it says in it that Reuven lent money to Shimon and everything Shimon owns is meshubad to this, then lo yachzir, you shouldn't return it, right? Now we explained, if you've been paying attention, ukimna, says the Gemara, since hopefully you've been learning Daf Yomi, we explained the Mishnah was referring to a case where kishachayav modeh, right, where the person said, I didn't pay it back. Because of course, if he said I paid it back, you don't return the shtar. And still you don't return the shtar. And the reason you don't return the shtar is mishum shema katav lavot b'nisan, because the shtar says January 1st, okay? And that's when Shimon thought he was going to borrow money from Reuven, so he wrote a shtar, January 1st, I'm borrowing money from you. But it turned out that he didn't lend him the money on January 1st. He only lent him the money in the first day of Tishrei, or July 1st, right? V'lo laveh ad Tishrei. right? And now you give a star to Ruvain that says Shimon borrowed $1,000 on January 1st. Ruvain can then take the star to collect from anything that Shimon sold since that time, right? Even though it's false. He didn't borrow the money till July. Not legally. Now, says Gemara, 1 second. Why are you worried about that? And therefore you don't give the star back to Ruvain. Why don't you say the same concern? That if Ruvain goes along and lies, that we're afraid he's going to lose everything. You didn't say Im Kain Malva Gufe Lo Shavik, that the Ruvain's not going to go along with this scheme. Damar Lake is he's going to say Katov Shtarach Rina B'Tishrei, write me a new star. Right? If you really want to borrow money from me, I want a new star. Did Dilma Shami Rabbanan Umafsidili? Because if the Rabbanan hear that we're playing funny business, they're going to throw it out. So why here do you say don't give the star back to Reuven because maybe he's in on the scheme? But in the case of Rabbi Yochanan, you say give the star back to Reuven because he would never get in on the scheme because he's going to lose everything. Interesting word, because there's a big difference in those two cases. Right? In one case, Shimon is saving 50 cents from having to write a new star, but Reuven saves nothing because he doesn't write the star. In the second case, if it's predated to January, Reuven gets a lot out of it too, because he can then collect property that really would have otherwise not been collectible. So it's possible that Reuven will lie when he gains, but not when he doesn't gain, which is obviously true, right? It says more Shani Hatam, Amri, Hatam, Mishum Itle Ravcha. Reuven gains something. Ravcha means Revach. He profits from it. The Qatar of the Kuchot Misama Tishrei. He can gain all the lukuchot, all the things that Shimon sold from January to July. Therefore, therefore he leaves it. And if Shimon wants to play these stupid games, these crazy games, he's going to go along with it. But Hacha, Kiban Deletli Ravcha, Ruvain has nothing to gain from this because the sof Shtara Ha'idda Kativ. Remember, it's the same day. That was Rabbi Yochanan's case. You found a star with the same date in it. So here, there's no gain for Ruvain. So ma'ika the katar the kuchot b'shtar shnimchal shibuda lo shavik. So because there's no big gain for him to collect from the kuchot, he's not going to go along with the scheme, and therefore in this case, Rabbi Yochanan says give back the shtar, even though in the Mishnah's case, the Chachamim, the Mishnah said don't give back the shtar. That's the complicated case. We have a few more minutes of the daf, but get your energy, even though it's 9:15, because it's a lot easier and it's much quicker, as you'll see. Says the Gemara, the last line.
I thought we said in the case that the star is paso, mafsidim, right?
Sorry, in the Mishnah.
I thought we said the star, the Rabbanim, they realize it's a scheme and they say the star is paso. So who's giving it back?
That's in the case in the Mishnah, correct? Because we're afraid that even if everyone agrees that it wasn't paid back, they're lying. It was paid back, and they're playing this game to try to get an earlier dated star. But in Rabbi Yochanan's case, where it was written for the same day, you don't have to worry about that because there's no scheme of getting an earlier dated star. What do you have to worry about? That maybe they're actually going to use the star a second time to save the scribe fees. But there, you don't have to worry about the malva going along with that because Reuven can lose everything and he gains nothing because it's not his responsibility to pay the scribe fees anyways. So therefore, Yochanan said you can trust the star and give it back to Reuven. Says the Gemara in the last line. If a person makes a claim about something that was determined by Beit Din, now this does not mean what it meant yesterday or earlier today. It means something that was a responsibility that Beit Din said you have to pay. And the first example is a ketubah, right? So a ketubah, even if you don't write in a ketubah that you're going to do certain things, remember we learned in Masechet Ketubot, there are minimums. You have to provide for the children. You have to pay 200 and 100. Right? We had all these different minimums in the ketubah. So if you claim after something from Beit Din, right, you say, I already did it, you're not trusted, right? Why? My timer. Because kol maaseh Beit Din, unless you can prove it, right? Anything that is responsibility of Beit Din is kiman denakat shtar b'yadei. It's as if you have a document that says that the person owes it to you. So by you just denying it, you'd have to prove that that's not yours. Said Rabbi Chia bar Abba to Rabbi Yochanan. Again, let me just make it more concrete. If a person walks into Beit Din and says, a woman says, I was divorced and I'm owed a ketubah, and the guy says, the husband or ex-husband says, I paid you your ketubah, he would have to prove that he paid. He'd have to have a receipt in order for him to be believed. Okay? It's as if she has a shtar. Amar le Rabbi Chia bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan. Thank you, Rabbi Yochanan, for sharing that. But that's a Mishnah. V'lo Mishnatenu hizu. I don't need you. Well, you're teaching us the smartest thing. Every one of us learned the Mishnah. Because what does the Mishnah say in Ketubot? Fourth line, Hamotzi get. Let's say a woman walks into court and she presents a get that says she was divorced, a valid get. Ve'ein imo ketubah, but she doesn't have a ketubah. Said the Mishnah Masechet Ketubot, goveh ketubata. She can collect a standard ketubah because of what Rabbi Yochanan said, basically. That because unless the husband can prove that he already paid it, he has a receipt, even though she doesn't have a shtar, it's as if she has a shtar and she gets to collect. So why was Rabbi Yochanan telling us that? The Mishnah says it. Amar Lei, so he said back to him, Rabbi Yochanan said back to them, that's not how you would have read the Mishnah if I didn't come help you along. Ilav, I love this statement. We have it several times. Ilav the dalai lecha chaspa. If I hadn't moved the chaspa usually means like the shards of pottery, right? If I hadn't moved away the shards of pottery, lo mishkachet marganita tuta. If I hadn't swept away the chaff, you would have never found the pearl underneath it, right? This is a little bothered by the mashal because he's not sure why pottery and pearls have anything to do with each other. But the mashal is basically, if I didn't clean off the mess, you would have never found the diamond ring in the haystack. It's a funny place to find it. So you would have understood the Mishnah differently. I explained to you what this Mishnah is trying to tell you. Said Abaye, slow down. Amar Abaye, who lived later, but Abaye said, my marganita. I don't get it. What exactly did you uncover in the Mishnah? What would you have otherwise thought? Dilma, because you might have thought, maybe the Mishnah that says, if you show up with a get without a ketubah, you get to collect, is only talking about remember, we had this in Masechet Ketubot. In some places, they didn't write the ketubah, it was assumed. So if you don't write the ketubah, there is no ketubah to be. It means that the get is the ketubah, right? To get hainu ketubah. So therefore, you basically have a shtar. But maybe b'makom shekotvin ketubah, in a place where they write a ketubah, maybe it's wrong. Maybe Rabbi Yochanan is incorrect, right? Inakita ketubah gavei, ilolo gavei. Maybe if you are holding the ketubah, the woman can collect her money, but if she doesn't have it, you can't say, because Beit Din said you have to get a ketubah, the burden's on the man to prove he paid. So how do you know that Rabbi Yochanan is even right? Hadar Amar Abaya, so then Abaya thought about it some more, and the next morning Abaya said, Lav Miltahi. In fact, I made a mistake. Rabbi Yochanan is right. This is what the Mishnah must mean. The Amri, which I said, Lav Miltahi the Amri, but I said didn't make any sense because if you understand the Mishnah and Ketubah to be telling you, look, in a place where they don't write a Ketubah, if a woman shows up with a get, you give her the money. But if they do write a Ketubah, if she shows up with a get and the husband says, I already paid you, or she shows up with proof that he died, and the Arshim say, we already paid you, right? If she's holding the ketubah, she gets to collect from the estate or the husband or the divorced husband, ex-husband. Lo gavi. But if she doesn't have a document, she doesn't collect, meaning Rabbi Yochanan would be wrong, then that can't be possible. Because what if she was only engaged, right? Amana min ha'erasin b'mai gavi. If a woman is engaged to a man and he then dies, right? So he has to pay a ketubah from Erison, but you don't write the ketubah until Nisuin, presumably, right? So she doesn't have any document. So how is she going to collect? It must be be'edei mitat bal, right? She will have witnesses who say he died. So she goes to the estate, but then the estate can always say, where's your document? You don't have a document. We paid you back. You have to prove it. She can't prove it. She'll never collect. Liton v'lema parate. The state can always say, we paid you back. So maybe in fact that's the case, that if the estate will say that she can't collect. So why would the Chachamim say that a woman gets a ketubah from Erison if every single case where the husband dies, the estate can say we already paid it back and there's no way for her to prove otherwise, right? So it must be that that's wrong. Now, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan is correct. And what Rabbi Yochanan said is that since Beit Din says you have to pay ketubah, even if you don't have the ketubah, unless the guy or the estate can prove that they paid it, you get to collect. Amalei Mark Shisha Breder of Chisda Ravashi. 1 second. How do you even know that a woman who is only Erison gets a ketubah? Amanam nina Erison itla ketubah minalan. Maybe that's not even true, right? You're proving to Rabbi Yochanan's correct because otherwise, how would an almana, a widow from Erison, ever collect a ketubah? But maybe that's wrong. Maybe she doesn't. Well, is it from the following Mishnah? It's not. The Mishnah says in Ketubot, let's say a woman is nit'armala, she's widowed, right? Onit Gashar, she's divorced. Says the Mishnah, Bein min ha'erisin, bein min ha'nisuin, whether she was only had erisin or also had nisuin, goveh et hakol. She collects everything. Now we're going to see in a second, everything means the basic ketubah and anything extra that was written by the husband, right? Which is very common. We write in our ketubot, right? We're going to give 200 and tosefet, min dana, I forgot all the language, an extra 200, right? Kikar kesef or something. So not kikar kesef, but anyways, you write a lot. So you collect everything. Says the Gemara, Dilma hecha de katafla. Maybe that's only if you wrote it. I mean, how do you know that you get a ketubah if you didn't write it? I mean, how do you know there's a guarantee to ketubah even if it's not written? The chidema, if you wrote it, of course you pay. Ma'ila memra. So then what's the chiddush of the Mishnah that you have to pay the ketubah? If he said I'm paying a ketubah, maybe it's the fukim of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Because Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said in ketubot, shelo katavla, you don't pay back, shelo katavla almanat, the konsa, it's tricha, right? That when a man writes to a woman, I'll pay you a ketubah of 200, and I'll add 10,000 more. And then he dies before they get married, before they consummate the marriage. He doesn't have to, his estate doesn't have to pay the extra 10,000. Because even though he didn't make a condition, it was on the assumption we're going to consummate the marriage, but he died. So he doesn't actually pay. So maybe the Chachamim are saying you do pay, right? Dekanami, it says where that must be the case. The Katani Goveta Kol. You collect everything, which implies the basic and the extra. Yeah, Rabbi Shmuel the Katavla, it's a situation where you wrote it in a document. Hainu the Katani Goveta Kol. You collect everything you wrote down. Eliyama de lo Katavla, if you didn't write anything, and it's just the 100 or 200 that's assumed by Chazal based on whether she's an almanah or a betula, my Goveta Kol. What do you mean you collect everything? You either collect a manah or matayim or the itla. So you can't prove from that Mishnah that a woman who is, you can't prove from that Mishnah that a woman who is engaged gets a ketubah, even if it's not written. Tomorrow, we're going to keep going and find the proof that, in fact, that is the case and that Rabbi Yochanan might be correct. And I know if we talked about tomorrow, can we do, I know it's late, it's a few short hours, morning or evening or afternoon or?
Afternoon or evening for me.
Well, let's hear all the votes.
Morning.
Well, for me personally, the morning is better, but do what's best for Riverdale, not Lakewood.
No, the evening I got commitments. I'm going to be away. So the morning's better.
Okay.
I think Miriam, we've got to do morning. I'm sorry.
Okay. I'll be alone again.
I'm sorry, Miriam. 7:45
Nah.
tomorrow morning. So early. So it's not that many hours. 10 hours from now.
We could do it twice.
And James will do the second one in the afternoon. 7:45 tomorrow.
How long is it gonna be tomorrow?
We can
Is
go
it a
fast.
long duff?
No, it's not a long duff.
Okay, so you know what? I'll hop in because we're doing my shir is actually tomorrow at 8:15. So I'll
Perfect.
try and do. Okay, great.
Hey,
Thanks.
that means everyone. That means we got to start on time. So be here 7:45.
Okay, bye.
Okay. See you in a few
Shabbat
hours.
tov.
I'll try my best. We daven at 7 o'clock in Lakewood. And except for Monday and Thursday, I'm usually out on time.
Okay. We're gonna try our best. 7:45. Good night, everyone. Shabbat
Shabbat
Yeah.
tov.